They called him a problem, right until the war needed a miracle. They called him a coward, a traitor. The Pentagon wanted him gone. But this one general knew something about winning wars that everyone else had forgotten, and he was about to prove it in the most brutal way possible. December 1944. The snow in the Ardennes forest is stained red. American soldiers are dying by the thousands. Hitler just launched the largest German offensive since D-Day, and the Allied command is in total chaos. Eisenhower needs someone to stop the bleeding, someone crazy enough to push back against an army that shouldn't even exist anymore. There's only one man for the job, and he's the same man they've been trying to destroy for 3 years. His name is George Patton, and if you only know him from the movies, you don't know him at all. Because the real story isn't about a tough guy who slapped a soldier. It's about a military genius who understood something that terrified the people in charge. He understood that nice guys don't win wars, and more importantly, he understood the enemy better than anyone else in the European theater. But let me back up, because to understand why Patton became America's secret weapon, you need to understand why they wanted him silenced in the first place. Sicily, July 1943. Patton's 7th Army is tearing through the island like a hurricane. While British General Montgomery is taking his sweet time moving up the eastern coast, Patton's forces are racing west, then north, moving so fast that the Germans can't set up proper defensive lines. His tanks are covering distances that military planners said were impossible. His infantry is marching through 100-degree heat with full packs, and they're still outpacing everyone's predictions. In just 38 days, Patton's army covered over 150 miles of the most difficult terrain in Sicily. They captured more than 90,000 enemy soldiers. And here's the thing nobody talks about. They did it with fewer casualties than anyone expected. Because when you move fast, the enemy doesn't have time to dig in. When you keep pushing, they're always off balance. Patton understood this in his bones. But then came August 3, 1943. A field hospital near Nicosia. Patton's walking through, visiting wounded soldiers. He's doing what commanders do, shaking hands, giving encouragement. He comes to a soldier sitting on a bench. No visible wounds. The guy's just sitting there, and when Patton asks what's wrong, the soldier says he can't take it anymore. His nerves are shot. And Patton loses it. He slaps the man, calls him a coward, tells him to get back to the front. The whole thing lasts maybe 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds almost end his career. A week later, it happens again. Different hospital, different soldier, same response from Patton. He slaps another man suffering from what we now call PTSD, what they called combat fatigue back then. Word gets out. The press goes crazy. Eisenhower is getting pressure from Washington to fire Patton immediately. But here's what makes this interesting. Eisenhower doesn't fire him. Instead, he does something clever. He makes Patton apologize to the soldiers, to the medical staff, to his entire army. It's humiliating. It's public. But Eisenhower keeps him on the roster because he knows something the politicians don't. He knows they're going to need Patton for what's coming next. So Patton gets sidelined, sent to England, given command of a fake army. And this is where the story gets wild, because that fake army becomes one of the most successful deceptions in military history. Operation Fortitude. Ever heard of it? Most people haven't, but it might be the reason the Allies won the war. Here's the setup. It's early 1944. Everyone knows the invasion of Europe is coming. The Germans know it too. They're fortifying the entire coast of France, building the Atlantic Wall, pouring concrete, laying mines, positioning artillery. The question isn't if the Allies will invade. The question is where. And this is where Patton's reputation becomes a weapon. See, the Germans respect Patton. Actually, respect isn't the right word. They fear him. German intelligence has been tracking his career since North Africa. They've studied his tactics in Sicily. They know he's the best tank commander the Americans have. So when German scouts report that Patton is in southeastern England, commanding the 1st United States Army Group, preparing for an invasion near Calais. The German High Command believes it. Except none of it's real. The 1st United States Army Group doesn't exist. It's inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, radio operators sending fake messages, actors in American uniforms walking around Dover. The whole thing is theater, but Patton's presence makes it believable, because the Germans think there's no way the Americans would launch the biggest invasion in history without their best general leading the charge. So when D-Day happens on June 6, 1944, and thousands of Allied soldiers storm the beaches of Normandy, the Germans barely move their reserves from Calais. For weeks after the invasion, Hitler's convinced the Normandy landings are a diversion. He's sure the real attack is still coming at Calais. He's sure Patton is going to lead it. By the time the Germans figure out they've been played, it's too late. The Allies have their foothold. And Patton, he's sitting in England furious. The biggest military operation in human history is happening, and he's not part of it. He's watching younger generals, less experienced generals, leading men into battle while he's stuck playing pretend with rubber tanks. But his time is coming, because once the Allies break out of Normandy, they're going to need someone who can move fast, someone who can exploit the gaps in the German lines, someone who thinks more like a race car driver than a chess player. On July 28, 1944, Patton finally gets his chance. He's given command of the Third Army, and what he does next changes the entire trajectory of the war. The Third Army becomes operational on August 1st. Within 2 weeks, Patton's forces advance over 400 miles. Let me say that again, 400 miles in 2 weeks, through enemy territory, against German resistance. This isn't a training exercise. This isn't moving through friendly land. This is combat movement, and it's happening at a speed that shouldn't be possible. His tanks are rolling 24 hours a day. His supply officers are having panic attacks because they can't keep up. Patton's burning through fuel and ammunition faster than it can be delivered. But he doesn't care. He knows something that the planners back in London don't understand. He knows that momentum is everything. Stop to wait for supplies, and the Germans build new defensive lines. Keep pushing, even on fumes, and they keep retreating. By September, Third Army has liberated more French territory than any other Allied force. They've captured thousands of German soldiers. They've destroyed entire Wehrmacht divisions. And they've done it with a style that's pure Patton, aggressive, relentless, and just a little bit insane. But then the fuel runs out. Not because Patton's forces used it all, because someone else got priority. Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's plan. The British general convinces Eisenhower to give him the bulk of the supplies for a massive airborne operation in the Netherlands. The idea is to capture a series of bridges, create a corridor straight into Germany, and end the war by Christmas. Patton thinks it's stupid. He says so, loudly. He argues that his Third Army is already moving, already winning, already positioned to drive straight into Germany from the south. Give him the fuel, he says, and he'll be in Berlin before the Russians. But Eisenhower chooses Montgomery's plan. Market Garden fails, badly. Thousands of Allied soldiers die or get captured at Arnhem. The corridor never materializes. And all the while, Patton's Third Army is sitting still, watching their fuel gauges, waiting for supplies that aren't coming. September turns into October. October turns into November. The advance slows to a crawl. The Germans get time to regroup, to reinforce, to prepare for winter. And Hitler starts planning something nobody sees coming. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, 5:30 in the morning. German artillery opens up along an 80-mile front. It's the largest artillery bombardment the Western Front has seen in months. Shells are raining down on American positions that were supposed to be in a quiet sector. These are green troops, inexperienced divisions sent here to rest and train. Nobody expected the Germans to attack here. The Ardennes is all forests and hills, terrible country for tanks. impossible for a major offensive. Except that's exactly what's happening. 250,000 German soldiers are pouring through the woods, hundreds of tanks, including the massive King Tigers that can destroy any American tank from a mile away. The Germans are punching through the American lines like they're made of paper. Within hours, entire units are surrounded. Within days, the Germans have created a bulge in the Allied lines 50 miles wide and 70 miles deep. The Battle of the Bulge has begun, and it's a disaster. American command is in chaos. Nobody knows how many Germans are attacking or where they're going. Communications are cut. Units are scattered. Some divisions are fighting, some are retreating, some are completely lost in the snow and fog. Eisenhower calls an emergency meeting at Verdun on December 19th. All his senior commanders are there. The mood is grim. And then Patton walks in. While everyone else is talking about defensive positions and orderly retreats, Patton's already figured out what needs to happen. He looks at the map, looks at Eisenhower, and says he can attack north in 2 days with 3 divisions. The room goes quiet, because what Patton just said is insane. His Third Army is currently attacking east, toward the Saar region. To attack north into the Bulge means turning his entire army 90 degrees. We're talking about thousands of vehicles, tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of artillery pieces. Everything has to turn, move over icy roads in the middle of winter, and launch a coordinated attack against prepared German positions. Military doctrine says this kind of maneuver takes at least a week of planning. Patton's saying he can do it in 48 hours. Eisenhower asks if he's serious. Patton doesn't blink. He's already given the orders. Before he even came to the meeting, he had his staff prepare 3 different plans for attacking north. He knew what Eisenhower was going to ask for. So while everyone else is still processing the bad news, Patton's already moving. December 22nd. Patton's Third Army attacks north. 3 full divisions, over 100,000 men, hitting the southern flank of the German penetration. This is the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division. They're moving through snow and ice, along roads that are barely roads, through weather so bad that aircraft can't fly. The Germans aren't expecting it. They're focused on Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne is surrounded and running out of ammunition. The German plan depends on capturing Bastogne quickly, using its road network to push even deeper into Belgium. But now they've got Patton's entire army slamming into their southern flank, and suddenly they're the ones who are off balance. The fighting is brutal. This isn't the fast, mobile warfare Patton prefers. This is slug it out in the snow, village by village, fighting. The weather is the coldest winter Europe has seen in decades. Soldiers are getting frostbite. Tanks are breaking down. Weapons are freezing. But Third Army keeps pushing north. December 26th. The 4th Armored Division breaks through to Bastogne. They've covered over 100 miles in 4 days, through enemy territory in the worst winter conditions imaginable. The 101st Airborne is saved. The German offensive has lost its momentum. But here's what makes Patton's maneuver so impressive. It's not just that he moved fast. It's that he moved his entire army, kept it supplied, kept it coordinated, and kept it fighting effectively while doing something that military textbooks said couldn't be done. He turned a multi-division army 90 degrees and launched an attack in the middle of winter in less than 3 days. Years later, German generals would call it the most impressive feat of generalship they witnessed in the entire war. This wasn't about firepower. It was about speed, coordination, and aggressive thinking. This was Patton doing what Patton did best, making the impossible look easy. The Battle of the Bulge continues into January, but the crisis is over. The Germans have shot their last bolt. They've lost thousands of soldiers and hundreds of tanks they can't replace. By the end of January, the Bulge is eliminated. The Allied lines are restored, and everyone knows the end is coming. But for Patton, the war is just getting started. Because now, finally, He gets to do what he's wanted to do since 1944, drive straight into the heart of Germany. March 1945. Patton's Third Army reaches the Rhine River. This is the last major natural barrier before Germany itself. The Rhine is over 1,000 feet wide in most places, fast-flowing, heavily defended. The Germans have blown up all the bridges. They're dug in on the eastern bank with artillery and machine guns covering every possible crossing point. Montgomery is planning an elaborate set-piece crossing further north. He's bringing up thousands of troops, massive artillery support, engineering battalions, specialized equipment. It's going to be the biggest river crossing since D-Day. It's scheduled for late March, and it's going to involve weeks of preparation. Patton doesn't wait. On the night of March 22nd, without asking permission, without any of Montgomery's elaborate preparations, Patton sends infantry across the Rhine in assault boats, just small boats paddling across in the dark. They establish a bridgehead. By morning, engineers are building a pontoon bridge. By the afternoon, tanks are rolling across. Patton calls Eisenhower to report the crossing, and he can't resist adding, "We're across without losing a man. The Germans are trying to stop us, but they can't. This is a hell of a lot easier than Montgomery's making it look." And just like that, Third Army is in Germany proper. The last barrier is gone. What happens next is one of the most controversial parts of Patton's career, because once he's across the Rhine, Patton wants to keep going, all the way to Berlin. He's convinced he can get there before the Russians. He's convinced the Allies should be the ones to capture the Nazi capital, and he's absolutely convinced that the Russians are going to be a problem after the war ends. He argues with Eisenhower. He argues loudly. His position is simple. Berlin has symbolic importance. Whoever takes Berlin wins the political victory, and if the Russians take it, they're going to control Central Europe after the war. Let Third Army race for Berlin, he says. We can get there first. But Eisenhower says no. The decision has already been made at the political level. Berlin is in the Soviet zone of occupation. The Russians are going to take it. Patton's Third Army is ordered to head southeast instead, into Czechoslovakia and Austria. Patton obeys, but he's not happy about it. And what he does in those final weeks of the war is remarkable even by his standards. Third Army starts moving so fast that headquarters can't keep track of where the front lines are. They're liberating towns before German defenders even know they're coming. In some cases, local German officials wake up to find American tanks in their town squares, and the war is already over for them. April 1945. Patton's forces reach Czechoslovakia. They could keep going, could take Prague before the Russians arrive. But again, Eisenhower orders him to stop. Prague is supposed to be in the Soviet sphere. Patton has to halt and wait. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over, and Patton is probably the only Allied general who's disappointed, because he thinks the Allies just won the battle but set themselves up to lose the peace. So what made Patton America's secret weapon? Why did the same man who got sidelined for slapping soldiers become the general that Germany feared most? It wasn't because he was tough. Plenty of generals were tough. It wasn't because he swore a lot or wore fancy uniforms or carried pearl-handled revolvers. That was all just theater. What made Patton special was that he understood something fundamental about warfare that most people forget. Wars aren't won by having better plans. They're won by moving faster than your enemy can react, by being aggressive when everyone else wants to be cautious, by taking risks that make the people in charge uncomfortable. Think about what Patton accomplished. In North Africa, his troops turned around an entire corps that had been beaten and humiliated and turned them into winners. In Sicily, he moved so fast that the campaign ended in half the time anyone predicted. After D-Day, his Third Army covered more ground and liberated more territory than any other Allied force in Europe. At the Battle of the Bulge, he did something military experts said couldn't be done, and he did it in half the time he promised. But here's the thing they tried to silence him for. Patton didn't just want to win battles. He wanted to win the peace that came after. And he saw clearly, probably more clearly than anyone else in the Allied command, that the alliance with the Soviet Union was temporary. That Stalin had his own plans for Europe. That the Allies were going to wake up after the war and realize they'd traded Nazi Germany for Soviet Russia. He said so, loudly, repeatedly, in ways that made politicians and diplomats very uncomfortable. And that's probably the real reason why, after the war ended, Patton got shuffled aside. Not because he slapped soldiers in 1943, but because he saw what was coming in 1945. On December 9, 1945, Patton was riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany. The car collided with a truck. The other passengers were barely injured. Patton suffered a broken neck. He died 12 days later on December 21st without ever leaving the hospital. Some people think it was just a tragic accident. Some people think it was convenient timing for a general who had become politically inconvenient. We'll probably never know for sure. But here's what we do know. When the Germans were asked after the war which Allied general they feared most, they didn't say Eisenhower. They didn't say Montgomery. They said Patton. Every single time they said Patton, because he was the one who thought like they did. Aggressive, fast, always attacking, never giving them time to breathe. And when American generals study maneuver warfare today, when they talk about speed and momentum and aggressive action, they're talking about lessons that Patton taught. Not through textbooks, but through results. Across North Africa, Sicily, France, Germany, and everywhere his Third Army went, the lesson was the same. Be bold, move fast, and never let the enemy recover. They called him a lot of things. Arrogant, reckless, controversial, and he was all of those things. But he was also the general who did what everyone else said couldn't be done. The one who turned armies around in 48 hours. The one who kept moving when everyone else wanted to slow down. The commander they tried to silence became the weapon they couldn't win without. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happened to the soldiers who actually fought under him.